Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about the Florida Panthers, as I've been talking about for the last couple of days. The Florida Panthers win the Stanley Cup, but I wanted to do some big picture stuff with Florida. So not just a basic, okay, here's where they're at, here's where they're going to be, because honestly, it'll be a pretty quick video. Yes, they have lost some players, but they've added some players. They're very good when it comes to finding exactly the right players to fill in. Forsling stands out as one they got on waivers. So this is a case of a team that's been run pretty well for years now, and that's something I'll discuss as well. So the exits from the team that won the Stanley Cup just a few weeks back. Ekman Larsson's gone to Toronto. I don't think that's a deal Florida would have wanted to sign with him if they'd had that money. We'll see how that contract ages in Toronto, but I do have a little bit of concern there. Stolarz goes to Toronto as the backup goaltender. Stolarz, that's a great contract for him. I think he's been a solid backup for years, and he'll probably get more starts in Toronto than he would have in Florida. Lomberg going back to Calgary. It's a good story for Calgary, I guess. I'm kind of surprised Lomberg doesn't stick around. Mahura goes to Seattle. Montour went to Seattle as well. And in terms of the losses for Florida, Montour's the one that I don't know if you can replace. But the good news is that Florida is not a team that's relied on one player. There's no one guy that you look at on Florida and go, now if you shut him down, Florida's done. And that's both on the blue line and up front. Stenlund leaves as well. Tarasenko, of course, goes to Detroit. So there's some loss in terms of some depth. But if you look at this top six, it's still very good. Verhaeghe, 34 goals, 72 points in 76 games. I love Carter Verhaeghe. He's due a big raise next summer. Barkov, 80 points in 73 games, just the 23 goals, but Barkov is so much more than points. We know that he's arguably the best two-way forward in the game right now. I think he's going to win a few more Selke trophies before his career is done. Reinhart, in 82 games, had 57 goals. He had 94 points. I don't think Reinhart gets to 50 goals again. I think that's a career year, but he's staying in Florida for basically the rest of his career. I think an 8-year extension probably solidifies that. And even if he only scores 40, so if he scores 17 less goals than he did this season, I think Florida's still probably pretty happy. Tkachuk, 26 goals, 88 points in 80 games for Tkachuk. I think he can score more goals, so maybe some of the goals Reinhart doesn't score, maybe some of those get picked up by Tkachuk. Tkachuk's a very good shooter. I think he could get to 40 goals in a season easily. Sam Bennett, of course, a lot of discussion about Sam Bennett. I understand it. 20 goals, 21 assists, 41 points in 69 games for Bennett this past season. But of course, there's the hits where he gets close to the line, and there was the punch on Marchand that made Boston fans angry and everything. And I get it, but Bennett, he plays on the edge, and I would expect more of that play from him. That's the playoff Bennett. I talked about that when he played in Calgary, that there was a playoff Sam Bennett that was just made for the NHL playoffs. During the regular season, you didn't necessarily see that when he was with the Flames. And then there's Evan Rodriguez, who once again shows that he's the Swiss Army knife of Swiss Army knives. 39 points in 80 games. He can play any role in your lineup, and he plays it really well. So Rodriguez has been solid. Of course, you have Lundell, can jump into the top six if needed. He signed an extension this offseason, and he really does almost everything that Barkov does. Barkov's at an elite level, but Lundell's at a pretty high level as well. You have two really good two-way forwards like that, and they both play down the middle. Makes it tough to play against you. The blue line is going to look different. So Forsling, with his 39 points in 79 games, tells part of the story. Forsling, it really is the plus-minus. His ability to shut the other teams down, his ability to play against the top players for the other team is really, it hit legendary status in these playoffs. I do expect him to get more consideration for the Norris next season than what he had this past season. Ekblad at 18 points in 51 games. I don't mind Ekblad. I know there's people who don't really like Ekblad. I think he's fine. I think he needs to stay healthy, but I think he's still fine. Kulikov had 20 points in 76 games. I think it was the best season Kulikov's had in a while. Schmidt gets added, 14 points in 63 games for him this past season. Mikkola, 17 points in 82 games. I think those guys will be fighting it out for that top four position. But either way, I don't think Florida's going to go wrong because they generally haven't. The weird part is that hasn't been the case with Florida throughout their history. Now, we'll talk about the tandem and then we'll get into their history. Bobrovsky, 36, 17 and 4 record, 915 save percentage. Spencer Knight's going to be the backup. It looks like at this point anyways. He played in the AHL this season. He's been down there for a while. Looking forward to seeing Knight coming back up and playing for Florida again. That should be a feel-good story. Now, in 2022, Florida was kind of a feel-good story being the President's Trophy winners. But by winning the President's Trophy, it means you're not going to win the Cup. However, in 2023, they get all the way back to the final. They did that as an underdog, where in the first round, nobody gave them a chance against Boston. And then they came back and they beat Boston after being 3-1 down in that series. And then it goes all the way through till Vegas knocks them off in the Stanley Cup final. This year, of course, they won the Stanley Cup. It took them 4 tries, but they finally did dispatch the Edmonton Oilers in that Game 7. But this is a team that now has become a winner, right? So you have a President's Trophy and you've been in the final 2 straight years for Florida with that Stanley Cup win. And it kind of papers over the fact that this team was awful for a long time. So back in 2011, drafting 3rd overall, they draft Jonathan Huberdeau. Huberdeau ends up being a great player, has a career year, and then they end up trading him to Tkachuk, right? That's not the only part of that trade, but that's your key thing here is Tkachuk's in and Huberdeau's out. Now, if Huberdeau was still there, would they have won the Cup this year? I don't know, because you're changing the makeup of that team, and the cap hit that Huberdeau's getting, if you add that to Florida, might that have given them more trouble with being able to stay cap compliant and sign everybody? Barkov was the number 2 pick in 2013. Barkov's a fantastic player. And yeah, it took him a little while to grow into the player that he is now, but he's fantastic. And in 2020, drafting 12th overall, they draft Lundell. So I think Lundell is a key guy for them going forward. And the fact that he was only drafted 4 years ago tells you all you need to know about how young he is. So Florida, not necessarily a team that's peaked yet, and they've won that Stanley Cup already. Now, when we look at this team's history, it's important to note they only made the playoffs 10 out of 30 seasons, including the one we just had, and they've made the playoffs 5 straight seasons, which is a franchise record. So prior to that, they'd made the playoffs 5 times in 25 seasons. I remember the first time I did a history of the Florida Panthers video and feeling sad because a lot of the areas where I'd fill in like cup wins and all this other great stuff that happened for organizations with Florida, it just didn't. Florida just didn't have that. They missed the playoffs in their first year in 1993-94. They missed it in 95. They made the playoffs in 96, got all the way to the Stanley Cup final before Colorado swept them aside. 97, they were out in the first round. And then 98, they missed the playoffs. 99, they missed the playoffs. In 2000, they make the playoffs, but they lost in the first round. Then they missed the playoffs in, so get ready for this, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. Around this time, you have Jay Bouwmeester looking for a chance to win, understands he's not going to find that in Florida, and he went to Calgary. Then we have the lockout, wiped out the season of 04-05, so they didn't miss the playoffs that year because there weren't any. They missed the playoffs in 06, 07, 08, 09, 2010, 2011. They make the playoffs in 2012, finally, losing the first round again, make the playoffs in 2013, 2014, 2015, make the playoffs in 2016, lose in the first round again, make the playoffs in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Before 2020, they lose in the qualifying round. So technically, did they make the playoffs? Well, it still shows as a playoff stat and number. So, I mean, they didn't make it to that first round. So, anyways, and then since then, they've been a playoff team, and now they're a Stanley Cup winner. So it is interesting how quickly they went from not being in the playoffs to being a Stanley Cup winner. But that's just kind of one of those things. That's kind of how that works. I'm going to do videos on this kind of stuff during the summer too, because it is interesting. Teams that make the playoffs that, you know, it's only their 3rd or 4th time in the playoffs since the last time they missed it. And then teams that make it the first time in, or maybe the 10th or 15th. But anyways, that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. So they lost in the final in 1996. They don't even win another round until 2022. This is why I kind of chuckle at people talking about, all right, well, the NHL's favoring them. Are you sure? Because this is a team that just failed and failed and failed. And up until very recently, people weren't in the stands. And I was being told people weren't in the stands because Florida's not a hockey market. But it turns out when the team's winning, fans show up. And then people say, well, yeah, they're showing up because they're winning. In most markets, that's how it happens. Yeah, I mean, I'm not far from Vancouver here. And when Vancouver's losing, it's way easier to get tickets. And it's way easier to get tickets in the lower bowl because they're not sold out. So this is kind of true of a lot of markets where when the team isn't good, fans don't necessarily show up. And when you look at Florida, they were bad for a very long time. This was a team that was either way out of the playoffs or they just barely miss. But there wasn't any reason for fans in that market to be excited. Now there is. And it starts September 2nd of 2020. Bill Zito gets hired as the general manager and takes over a team that, yeah, I mean, they lost in the qualifying round, but there's some good pieces there for Florida. And I think Zito's been able to really execute quite well as a general manager. And then June 22nd of 2022, they hired Paul Maurice as coach. What's interesting is you're hiring him as coach after you've won the President's Trophy with Andrew Burnett. And it looked like a mistake through a lot of 2022, 2023, in that they were nowhere near as good. It felt like Maurice's message wasn't getting through, and the systems he wanted weren't being deployed until late in the season. So they figured it out late in the season, but now they had to play the Boston Bruins in the first round, and nobody was expecting to beat the Boston Bruins, and then they did. So now it looks genius. Maurice holds up a Stanley Cup for the first time in June, right? And yet, back towards the end of 2022, 2023, nobody thought, well, Florida's going to win a Stanley Cup soon here, and Maurice is going to be the guy. It's 1,848 regular season games coached by Paul Maurice without a Stanley Cup. So he finally gets that, but that's Marlowe numbers right there in terms of games played and not having a Stanley Cup. So I could not be happier for Paul Maurice finally getting the chance to lift that Stanley Cup. I'm sure Jets fans had conflicted emotions about that, but we'll see what happens this coming season. I do think Florida is still going to be a contender. I think they're probably going to look to add a defenseman, because when I look at this spot here where you miss Montour, right? You miss Montour in that second pairing. They may want to pick up a second pairing defenseman, but Florida's done a good job before of knowing exactly who to pick up and from where and who's going to click with their team. So I don't think there's any reason to panic if they don't add a top four defenseman, because they'll probably have something else in mind. Bill Zito's been very smart with how he's run this team. Paul Maurice has been very smart with how he's coached this team. I see no reason to think that's going to change this coming season. So the question then becomes, after all of this failure, and now they've had some success, will it continue? Do they win the Stanley Cup in back-to-back years? I think they have a real chance. I think they have a real chance because this is not a significantly weaker team with the losses they've suffered this offseason thus far. And there's still time. There's still time for them to be able to, work out a trade and maybe make some additions and upgrades. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And again, for the NHL just favors Florida. They didn't favor it for a long time apparently because it was bad. And there was a lot of talk about maybe they're going to have to move. Not anymore. This is a team that's quite well situated where they are. Everything's pretty comfortable. And Bill Zito deserves a lot of credit for that. Taking a market where there hadn't been a winner and there hadn't been any kind of winning mindset and just changing that virtually overnight. So kudos to him for that. And let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Channel recently passed another 1,000 subscribers, so thank you guys so much for that. I will talk to you again soon.